Okay.
Hello everybody, I'm Mark Pennesi. I'm Executive Director of Chik-Wauk, and we're really glad to have you here as fall is really kind of in the air. We have lots still going on. We're open 7 days a week through MEA weekend in October, so mid-October. So come and visit us. And this program is sponsored by Visit Cook County. We're grateful to them, and also donors give lots of money to us to help support our program. So thank you, Visit Cook County and donors. Coming up, we have a few more programs going through September. So I'll have to give a shout out because Monday I am doing a program at 1 o'clock on moose. And we had a great time this summer doing these porch talks. So stop by on Monday at 1 o'clock. And then our official programs coming up next Saturday will be backpacking trail on the Chik-Wauk Trail. Wonderful backpacking trail. And I think we have one of the people that has done a ton of work on that. So that is next Saturday the 13th. And then September 20th, we have a program on Helen Hoover, who is a noted author. That should be really just excellent. So come for additional programs, and I get to introduce Ryan. I'm going to mispronounce your name. Okay. Because my name is Hennesi, but he pronounces it Pennesi.
You got it.
Oh, perfect.
You nailed it.
And Ryan is a noted, I'm going to say award-winning wildlife photographer, and also works for the Forest Service in a similar field, wildlife technician, and is based out of Finland, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's hear it for Ryan.
Well, yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Bonnie, and everyone at the Chik-Wauk Museum for having me. Today I'd like to talk with you a little bit about both my passion and hobby as a wildlife photographer, and also a little bit about my career with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm a wildlife technician, and kind of how the two complement each other. And so the talk is about that blending of art and science and visual storytelling, which is what I consider myself, a visual storyteller. And so there's a lot of clicking, so I might park it here once in a while just to kind of advance, but here we go. So a little bit about my story. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so for me it started young, this passion. You know, when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, I was always outside exploring in my backyard, going to vernal pools, looking for salamanders, catching frogs, that sort of thing. So I think for a lot of folks that are into wildlife and get into these environmental fields, it can start early for them, but it doesn't have to start in childhood. It just did for me. And so kind of leading up to here, I decided to study wildlife and fisheries conservation. I always kind of thought I might be like a veterinarian for animals. I was always really interested in animals, but I couldn't deal with the needles. I get too woozy with blood and stuff, so I shifted gears and focused on wildlife instead, and studying animals in their natural habitats. And so these pictures are from my undergraduate. I went to UMass Amherst. And while I was there, I got involved with the student chapter of the Wildlife Society and got to do fun field trips. We helped out at a moose hunt check station, which was pretty cool. And during the summers there, I worked at a family-owned zoo and rescue center called Animal Adventures back in Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. And I'm holding a coati there, which is a South American raccoon, and they were one of my favorites there. Very intelligent and curious critters, and they did this thing where they would hoard smells. So they would go after your shampoo by rubbing their hands in your hair, or going after my armpit, my deodorant. They would try to grab it, and then they'd rub their tail so they could store the scent for later and show each other the smells that they've collected. So really fun summer jobs. And then from there, I worked with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, and I learned how to do trail work and how to build corridors so that people can go out and experience nature. And I did things like building rustic bridges and staircases that led up mountainsides and whatnot. I got a AmeriCorps position with the Student Conservation Association, and I got to start doing environmental education in rural schools out in western Massachusetts. It was really fun. Worked with elementary kids and led hikes for folks to get out there and interpret nature. In 2013, I came to Minnesota, and I've been here ever since. Just really fallen in love with the place. I worked at the Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center. Show of hands, have anyone been there or know of it?
What in Ely?
It is actually in Finland, but there is a Wolf Center in Ely, which is also super cool, the International Wolf Center. But yeah, so at Wolf Ridge, kind of the focus is getting kids outside and getting immersed in nature. And the curriculum is all about, natural resource management, and they have a ropes course and skiing trails in the winter and all that kind of thing. So it was really fun. And that's really where I fell in love with the North Shore too. And then I went to the Carleton County Land Department, and I was hired as a forestry and wildlife technician. And so I would help the forester do everything from setting up timber sales to also helping our state partners with wildlife surveys. So I got to go help and count sharp-tailed grouse at the Lex, and got to do, right here I'm posing with a bird habitat sign. So we partnered with the American Bird Conservancy to do some really important work restoring habitat for the golden-winged warbler and other ground nesting species like ruffed grouse. So one of my favorite photography techniques is camera trapping. And before I talk about my experience with it, I just want to start from the very beginning of camera trapping, also known as trail cameras or remotely triggered cameras. It actually started over 100 years ago. There's this guy named George Shiras, and he was the first person to photograph wildlife at night with flash. And he had his assistant paddle him around in this canoe, and he's got this gigantic camera, and back then he had to ignite a flash of magnesium powder. It was like an explosion. So we got some really interesting reactions from the animals.
Wow.
There's a moose in 1909, a lynx in Ontario, Canada, and then of course there's a bunch of deer reacting to that explosion of light. But it just floors me that this person was able to take wildlife images like this over 100 years ago, and remotely even. So he would set up a series of trigger cords that the animals would have to literally trip over for the camera to take a picture. And then this one. This is a real picture, and this is from 1966. Another photographer named Ed Caesar, who was responsible for being involved with a lot of wildlife documentaries and whatnot throughout his life, but had this big, heavy suitcase of a camera trap, and had trigger wire, and was able to capture this image of a lynx in a snowshoe hare, which I just find remarkable. And then today. So, you can see this technology is really matured. Yes, that's a fox making a funny face, also a kidding. But that's a DSLR camera, and it's got a hot shoe attachment on the top of the camera that is wirelessly triggered. And so we have Bluetooth technology now, and the photographer is not actually physically pressing the button. They're hundreds of yards away. And they have a trigger there, and they're pressing the shutter at the perfect moment. But yeah, and so there's remotely triggered cameras, and then there's trail cameras as well, which I really fell in love with when I was at the Wolf Ridge Environmental Learning Center. We had students mostly 5th and 6th grade, and it's just the perfect age to get people excited in wildlife. And they can see that the trails where we have the cameras are also walked by a wide host of different species that they never would have imagined that are there. And the kids have pretty fun with it too. They like to pose and dab and all sorts of fun things, like get real close. But the technology opens doors for us to ask questions and be curious and actually find answers to those questions as well. Like, what lives in the burrow behind the west dorm? That was, during one of our classes, we found this burrow on the ground, and they said, well, what's in there? And I said, well, let's set a camera and then find out. So we could go back the next day and review the footage. So there we've got one of our naturalists. That's my friend Sarah Waddle. She actually works in Grand Marais with University Extension, but she was a naturalist with me, and she's walking by, and then there goes a group of students to a class, and then 5 minutes later, there's a gray fox that comes in right after the students, and then there's a red squirrel by the burrow. Then there's a mouse by the burrow. I don't know if you see it. It's in the bottom left there. You can see its eye glowing there. And a chipmunk, and then a badger, American badger. Until these trail camera images, we didn't know that they were at Wolf Ridge, but they are. And since then, I've gotten quite a few different pictures of badgers way up the North Shore in Finland, Minnesota, which is kind of an interesting thing. It seems like maybe they're expanding their range. Another thing that I'm involved with is the Midwest Peregrine Society, and so back when peregrines were almost extirpated, so almost locally extinct from the state, they had a reintroduction program, and every year they banned the chicks on the North Shore, and they get information about them, and one of the things they're interested in is tracking individuals over time, individual peregrine falcons. And so at this site, I'm up top with a radio, and I'm talking to a climber who's dangling 100 feet off of a cliff and trying to explain the trail camera settings that he needs to program in there. It's like, oh, maybe we should have done this at the top of the cliff before you went down. But we were able to get some really cool footage of peregrine falcons, and we can answer questions like, how often do the parents bring the chicks food? You know, you can see the chicks develop at different stages as they get closer to fledging and leaving the nest. What does that moment look like? But what we were really interested in was the identity of the male, which was banded. So we can actually see that this one was banded, and we can tell which individual it was, where it came from on the shore, how old it is, which is pretty exciting. I want to talk a little bit about kind of how I got into the artistic side of photography. I have a friend and a mentor named Benjamin Olson. I met him through some mutual friends at Wolf Ridge, and he's incredibly talented. These are a couple of his images that have won awards, and you know, when I met him, I saw his pictures and I was like, wow, I could never do that. I mean, that's incredible. And he's like, well, anyone can learn the artistic side of photography. Anyone can pick up a camera. And so he encouraged me. He's like, if you want to do this, I'll help you out. And so he taught me a lot about settings and all that. And where I was coming from was I had been doing a lot of tracking and teaching myself, you know, animal sign and how to interpret that. And so it worked really well, our friendship. So we both got to share information with each other. And I taught him to track, and he taught me photography. So I spent my life savings, and I got a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, f5.6 Canon lens, and this was one of the first like really good encounters I had. It was this wolf that was checking out a carcass on the side of the road, and I was so excited that I took so many pictures, and like 90% of them were like wrong. I mean, the settings were wrong, and they were blurry and out of focus, but I got a couple like crisp shots of the wolf, and I was just so excited that I fell down with my feet just pure excitement. And my friend Ben was telling me, you know, the trail cameras are a great tool for scouting and for teaching, but if you ever want to get them published in magazines and whatnot, they've got to be a higher resolution. And so I built my own camera trap. And so what that is it takes a DSLR camera, which is a higher quality camera with higher megapixels and everything, and put it into a waterproof case. So, and then wired to flashes. So it's like a photo studio out in the woods. And then it has a motion sensor on it, which is attached to the tree right there. And then there's the camera, which is inside the waterproof housing. So I have to contend with all the elements, right? So like snow and rain and mud and curious animals is another thing I have to deal with. But the images that I can get are really incredible. They're wide angle, it's a wide angle lens, and so I can depict the animal in its environment, and show it. And the lens is really only a foot from the subject, and so it offers a unique perspective. This is American beaver. This is on the edge of its dam. I could see where it was kind of hauling itself out of the water, and I placed my camera strategically there. And I just love the like white mittens of the snow that's going on. I think that was really, really fun picture there. Bears, oh my gosh. They can be such a nuisance. I mean, I think bears are super cool. They're really interesting animals, but man, they've done a lot of damage to my camera traps over the years. Back when I first started, everything was wired. So I had wires running to my flashes, wires running to my sensor, wires running to the camera, and this bear was like, chew toy, perfect. So ripping the wires out and literally taking my camera trap apart piece by piece. In the background, that is a roadkill deer that I drug off the road so that other scavengers wouldn't also get hit by cars. And there's a unique opportunity to monitor the carcass and see what critters would benefit from that, what would eat the dead deer. So that's why the bear was there, but decided to take a break from feeding to feed on my camera. So started ripping it apart. And of course, this happens a lot too. Bears are super strong, and even if I have a sturdy tripod or attach it to a tree, they just rip it down, and they recompose my shot, and they often it's just facing straight up into the sky where it gets rained on and everything else. And there's a close-up for you. They like to get up in there, and their nose slime just like coats my lens, and it makes it so that none of the other pictures turn out. But yeah, so sometimes animals are too close. With the camera traps, I have to pre-focus because I'm not there to like physically press the focus, and so I have to guess where the animal is going to be in the frame. So this happens, animals come too close than I'm expecting, like this raccoon, or some condensation, like I was dealing with this moose. Like the shot would have been really cool if it wasn't for all that fog on the lens. And I did have a moose once trip on my wires too, and it didn't, fall down. It just tore through everything. So these are some of the things that I contend with when I'm camera trapping. Or again, if anyone can figure out how to defrost a camera trap lens from far away, that'd be awesome. But yeah, so can anyone venture a guess as to what was behind the foggy lens on this one?
Fox?
It's a bobcat. I heard a few cats out there. Yeah, it would have been a cool shot of a bobcat, but all fogged over, unfortunately. And so my friend Ben, one day we were going out, we were on a drive, and we were going to go try to find some wildlife, and we found a roadkill fox. And I kept driving, and he's like, "Oh, could you go back? I'd like to photograph it." And I was like, "Why would you want to photograph a dead animal? Like, wouldn't you want to photograph something live?" And he was like, "Well, it's an opportunity actually to tell a story." So that's where the conservation photography aspect comes in. He exposed for the sky, and he waited till a vehicle was coming by, and he's like, vehicle collisions are a conservation issue, and so I can tell that story through this picture. And that stuck with me ever since then. And I was like, oh, okay, like this stuff can be used for photojournalism. It can be used for good. And so I've aspired to tell stories with my images as well. This is a fellow named Carlton Ward Jr., and he's been really pivotal in work in the Florida Everglades, especially with Florida panthers, and how genetically bottlenecked they've become and fragmented their habitat has become with development. And so through his camera trap photography, he's raised a lot of awareness for this issue, and he's even gotten it published in National Geographic, which really extends the reach of these conservation efforts. And so this is what a freshly developed cookie cutter housing site might look like, encroaching on some of this habitat, this critical habitat. And there's, this is a documentary that Carlton Ward put out where he's trying to highlight the importance of underpasses. So highways and then areas underneath those highways where animals can safely cross without getting hit by cars. This is another wildlife conservation photographer named Morgan Heim, and again with the vehicle collisions, she wanted to tell a story about that and bring some dignity back to these animals. So she created bouquets around them, and the project was called Last Leap Towards Flowers, I think. But I thought it was a pretty cool way to artistically depict a pretty big issue. And it also highlights creative solutions like this overpass up in Canada, where they've created these living bridges that kind of they incentivize animals to cross safely in these areas, and they put trail cameras out, and they find that they really do get used quite a bit, and they probably are making a difference. And I think there have been a few wildlife underpasses, even in Minnesota, specifically designed to help out with that issue. And so with the Forest Service, I'll talk a little bit about some of the work I'm involved with. So this is the sign as you're coming up the Gunflint Trail, right at the the George Washington Pines there. And so our mission is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests to meet the needs of present and future generations, and also provide multiple uses. So recreation, timber, wildlife habitat, all these things kind of in tandem. And we are in a very unique place. Minnesota has an intersection of 4 biomes. Right now we're in the coniferous forest biome. And what's interesting is that we have animals that are kind of at the northern extent of their range and at the southern extent. And so we have a lot of biodiversity here. So these are some pictures from work. I'm in the wildlife department. And so I get to be a part of some really cool work. On the far left, I do moose habitat work. Every once in a while, I find a bone dropped by a moose. In the middle, actually yesterday, I was climbing, I was up in the canopy of 100-foot tall red pine trees collecting cones that could be then sown at our orchard and then planted as trees on the forest. And then in the far right, it's bird banding, and every once in a while, we don't catch the songbirds we're intending to, but we catch a critter that's maybe trying to eat one of the songbirds that got caught in the net. So that's a sharp-shinned hawk there. So habitat management, building future resilient forests, and monitoring are some of the things that I work on. So what can we do for wildlife? These are some of the species that we watch a little bit closer. They're on what's called the Regional Forester Sensitive Species List. And so those are species that from research and studies have been shown to be, their populations are having a downward trend, or there's concern for loss of viable habitat. And so these are some of those critters. Other things to consider, this was put together by Joseph Moore, and he's with the National Weather Service down in Duluth. And so he's saying that changes to our daily weather are expected to impact the health of not only people but wildlife as well. It's very likely that we're going to experience warmer temperatures, reduced air quality, and extreme precipitation events. And these things can affect wildlife. So here's a picture that I took in 2021 of the Baptism River while the region was under extreme drought. You can see there's not, there's gaps where there's hardly any water, and I walked. You would walk right down the middle of it, and there were brook trout struggling to get from one pool of water to another. And then the flip side of this is extreme flood, where we had 7 inches of rain in just a few hours. Which did a lot of damage to human infrastructure, but also, it has an impact on habitats out there when you have these extreme swings from one to the other. example, we help the state monitor ruffed grouse populations, and following this extreme rain, they were seeing a reduction in broods counted during the summer. Wildfire frequency and intensity. And so future conditions are expected to increase fire risks in northern Minnesota by the end of the century. This is an image taken by George Ilstrup with his permission. I just thought it was a really striking picture of the Greenwood fire, which happened in 2021. And it was pretty explosive, and it burned in a lot of pretty wet areas, you know, which maybe under normal circumstances wouldn't have burned as hot. But it's definitely something that we contend with living up here, and especially when we have combined factors like insects and disease. And so this is a picture that I took with my drone, and you can almost see a line right down the middle where you have a healthy stand of pine, and then you have dead and dying spruce and fir on the left that were affected by the spruce budworm insect. And for those of you that live up here, you've probably seen a big change just in the last 5 years of the budworm front moving through and up into this area. And in Finland and Isabella, where I live, you know, it's been persisting even a little bit longer. It's sort of, we're at the northern edge of it here, but man, some of the stands over in Isabella have just really fallen apart, and they look a lot different now. And when you have, you know, that much fuel in dead trees, it can make these wildfires that much more explosive. And so, you know, so that's the spruce budworm there. It is a native insect, but with these changing in environmental conditions, they can be a lot more devastating and to the environment. And then there's a Cape May warbler, so that's a species that would actually benefit from the budworm temporarily, and they're kind of specialists, so they kind of follow around the budworm. So there's a fellow named Ron Moen. He's a researcher out of the University of Minnesota at the Natural Resource Research Institute, and he has made some predictions about how wildlife composition may change up here. And so that red box that I've highlighted are some of the mammals that he predicts to be gone by 2070. So he's predicting, you know, snowshoe hare, chipmunk, least chipmunk, northern flying squirrel, porcupine, pine martens, fisher, canada lynx, moose to potentially be gone from the landscape, which is kind of a sobering thought in my mind. And it's generally expected that warmer temperatures will lead to more favorable, will be more favorable to species at the northern extent of their range and less favorable to those boreal species. And so the moose is kind of a poster child for that. So can you find the hare?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the bottom there.
Yeah.
Here's a circle around. So snowshoe hare, they turn colors. They turn white in the winter, and that really helps them blend in with their surroundings, that camouflage and evade, you know, predators. And they really rely on that. I mean, sometimes I just about step on them in the winter before they flush and run away, because they're really conserving their energy and waiting to see if you're just going to walk by or not. And so this is one thing that can happen here, that hare is a lot easier to find, right? They turn white too soon and the snow hasn't come. And so that means that they're a lot more susceptible to predators because they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So these are a really important host of species in the woodpecker family. They create these cavities in live and dead trees, and once they're done with those cavities, lots of other wildlife make use of those cavities, and so they're really, really important. And there's been some discussion about woodpecker numbers being down, according to some monitoring done by the Natural Resource Research Institute. So that's something that we're really keeping an eye And then these are some of those secondary cavity nesters that make use of, they don't have the tools that the woodpeckers do with that beak and their cushioned brain with their tongue that wraps around it, and they can really excavate where these critters can't. So they just move in after the fact. So there's a flying squirrel, that northern flying squirrel, a sawwood owl, and a American martin there. One of the cool projects that I got to work on was I was a technician with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and American martins were over-trapped at one point, so they were pretty much gone from the state, and they had a reintroduction program. And since then, they've monitored them closely, and they have been able to bring back that trapping season. But you can see with my camera traps, I'm actually able to read the ear tags that were on there without having to trap the animal. So that's another benefit of these remote cameras, is that we can sample wildlife without having to stress them out. It's a passive way to survey. But of course, we did have to trap it to put the tag on in the first place. And another thing that they're interested in is the throat patch of American martins are distinct between individuals. And so if you can get them to look up and get a good picture of it, you can almost build a model to recognize that pattern over and over again when you see that same animal, and they can track individuals over time. So that's what I was trying to do there. Martins are pretty silly and curious, and so this one was hanging upside down from the top of my camera trap. Some funny pictures there. Another thing that some researchers are doing, this is a project by Michael Joyce. He's interested in the overlap between bobcat and fisher, and how there's been some evidence to suggest that bobcats are expanding their range, and fisher numbers have been dropping over the last decade. And they've documented where bobcats are killing female fishers, and so that was something he's interested in studying. And I got to follow him around and take some pictures to help tell the story of his research. And so this is one of his technicians, and they actually had some radio-collared martin in the area, which we were trying to find. That's what his antenna situation is going on there. There's a radio signal being emitted from that collar. And so one of the things that Michael Joyce was interested in was he noticed that maybe there's a lack of large diameter trees on the landscape that have cavity potential, because fishers in particular, they need really big trees. And so he was hanging these boxes, and at first he had a little bit of bait, which is a roadkill deer leg there, to kind of encourage them to come in. But it's a box, kind of like a wood duck box that you'd hang in a tree, or like a bat box that you put up. It's to encourage use, and we would monitor it with a trail camera. And this is when I was at Carleton County Land Department. But we did get some really interesting pictures of fishers checking out these boxes. That's a male, and they designed the openings so that the males can't actually get in, because they got boxy heads. Their heads are too big. And the cavities are for females, because they're obligate cavity nesters, so they raise their young in the boxes, and they don't want the males to be able to come in, because sometimes the males will predate on their kits. And so the male couldn't get in, but the female could. So there's a female going in and out. So it was interesting. He had done this, and he didn't see a whole lot of use, which is kind of interesting. So I think his funding may have run out temporarily, but in British Columbia they did have some success with fishers using these boxes. So it's just an interesting example of one of the things that we can try to do to put a band-aid on a problem, when really it's looking at forestry management practices and thinking about how to retain more large trees on the landscape that have cavity potential. So again, Ron Moen, he's saying there is going to be a balance. So maybe if we lose some species, there could be other species that are coming in. And he's basing this off a number of different studies and different predictions. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But he's seeing, these are some of the different groups of critters we could see an increase in. This is a really cool spot that I kind of happened upon when I put out my camera traps. I'm always scouting, so it takes a lot of time to find where animals are going to go naturally. With the ethical side of photography, I don't use any bait or lures, and so I'm just relying solely on animal signs. So I find stuff out in the world that I think there's evidence that the animals are going to return to it. And so I found this cave, and right at the base of the cave I had found areas where bobcats had been depositing scent. So they'll, just like a cat in a litter box, they'll go to the bathroom and then they'll cover it. And so I found some scrapes there, and I wanted to get pictures of the bobcat. And I was surprised to see all these snowshoe hare like running in and out of this cave. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if they're seeking cover in there or what, but I kept my camera there for a while, and I got all sorts of critters going in and out of this cave. I had raccoons, the snowshoe hare. There's the bobcat showing up to the scrape to refresh the scent. There's a bear going in and out of the cave. And then something I did not expect. There was a mountain lion.
Wow.
So we have mountain lions here. It seems like for the most part they're males making these large migratory journeys to try to find new home ranges. They're coming from the Black Hills most likely, North Dakota. But there have been a lot of sightings of mountain lions over the last 10 years. And the question is, are there more doorbell cameras and more trail cameras out in the world? So maybe there's just, more people looking, or are they really, increasing in the number of individuals that are here? So there's one, in Minneapolis that I think ended up getting hit by a car. There's one taking a backyard stroll in Duluth. That's one that I got on the North Shore that I just showed you. There's one in Voyageurs National Park. So you're seeing like really spread out observations throughout the whole state. And then of course there was this interesting one that was up in Michigan. Somebody was up in the remote Upper Peninsula and found cougar kittens out in winter. Kind of interesting. I don't know if that means there's a breeding population or not. I don't think they were able to locate them again, but perhaps they're expanding. The DNR does keep a page where they map wild cougar verifications in the state, and so the symbol where it's a camera is where they have physically taken a picture from somebody's trail camera that they reported, and then the track symbol would be, from a track that an expert had went and looked at and confirmed. And then there also have been a couple scat samples in the state that have been genetically tested to confirm mountain lions. But you can see, from around 2010 till now, the number of sightings has really increased, which I think is interesting. And they used to have a much bigger range in the United States. So this is 1990 to present, and so all the dots are verified, individuals over time. And so there was one, that red star, that actually made it all the way, from the Black Hills to Connecticut, where it was hit by a car. So they can really cover a lot of ground when they're looking for new territories. So ever since I got that one cougar picture, I've kind of been obsessed with trying to capture more of them. And so I'm looking for places kind of like this where there's a high deer density, and I think that they're drawn to these rocky outcroppings, so that I've really been kind of keying in on these areas where I try to find heavily used deer trails that intersect where there might be some rocky kind of areas in the woods nearby. No luck yet, but I was working on it this morning. I was checking a few cameras this morning too. And so I'll talk a little bit about moose. I made this image. I found this skull with the antlers still attached and put it in this bed of marsh marigolds and took the picture kind of to show the uncertain future, to depict the uncertain future of moose. In the last couple decades, we've lost more than half of the historical population, and that trend has leveled off, but we still aren't seeing the increase of numbers that you know, to what they were. And so the DNR flies these aerial surveys in partnership with the tribal entities like the 1854 Treaty Authority, and so that's what I was trying to depict here. This is a picture that I took with my drone to kind of simulate what it would look like from an airplane when they do the counts. And so this is just a graph kind of showing that population over time, and you can see that you know, we've sort of, that decline, that sharp decline has at least stopped, but we're just sort of creeping along. They're still at about less than half of what it was, you know, in the early 2000s. And so there's a lot of things that to consider that you know, impact moose. Heat stress is definitely a big one. Available forage, thermal cover, so that's again tied to, you know, heat stress, being able to get into shade. And brainworm is a parasite that that deer can transmit, and it's benign for them. This parasite, you know, doesn't kill the deer, but they are integral in its life cycle, and they can actually pass that on in areas where they overlap with moose. You know, the worm ends up kind of making the moose's brain into Swiss cheese, and they get disoriented, and eventually they just succumb and die from it. And then deer could benefit from the warmer temperatures, and it seems like they might be expanding their range as well, which isn't great for that overlap. But then winter tick, so that's another big one for moose. There are these ticks that they really aggravate the moose, and in the winter they'll try to rub the ticks off on vegetation, and they can lose a lot of hair that way. And I've found big clumps of hair just on top of the snow in the winter. And when they lose that hair, they're more exposed to the elements, and they're losing energy that way, and they're just that much more stressed. And then of course their predation is part of the equation as well. Wolves and black bears can predate on moose. But you can't just point to one thing and say that's why, you know, that's the wolves are killing all the moose. It's really a combination of everything working together, which can explain the decline we've seen. And there have been some studies to show that you know, wolves can actually help the health of populations if they go after individuals that are sick or old. So here's some of the moose habitat work that I'm a part of. There's this Moose Habitat Collaborative, which is a collaboration of a bunch of different partners, including the Forest Service, including tribal governments, including county governments and state. And one of the things that is looked at is you know, trying to improve the habitat for the moose. Could be one way to potentially help the population. So this is an area where the brush has really kind of taken over these openings, and you can see it's been heavily used by the moose, and so it's just been mowed at about waist high, and the brush has responded by over and over again sending up new leaders that just get browsed and browsed and browsed, to the point where the nutritional value of the brush has actually diminished over time. And so if we go into these areas and we literally cut it with a saw or with like a dozer with a blade, the root system, it will stimulate new growth, and that growth will have more nutrition for the moose to benefit from. And then at the same time, we can also plant long-lived conifers in those areas to increase the thermal cover. And so these are some balsam fir, and you can see where, you know, there's this like big gap between the top and bottom. And when moose are when they're on the mainland and they're browsing on balsam fir, you know that there's kind of a lack of nutrition going on. You don't really see that much unless you go to Isle Royale, where every single balsam fir has been browsed. Just kind of they're running out of options. And then alder, this is where they've actually taken their incisors and scraped the bark off of the brush. And then you see trees that almost look like little shrubs just because they've just been browsed and browsed and browsed, and we call this carrot topping, where you know the brush just gets stunted, or these are little aspen trees that have actually died because they've been browsed so much. So this is just a sign in a moose habitat area where some work has been done, and that area actually was burned on a 3 to 6 year rotation, because wildfire is one of those natural disturbances that moose can really benefit from. They can really benefit from 0 to 10 age forest, so that early successional forest out there. Another tool is the hand crew. So that's a gentleman that has a brush saw, and so cutting that brush prior to planting trees, or using a dozer with like a blade attachment there. And then following that with diversity planting, so putting more long-lived conifers like red pine, like white pine, like jack pine, northern white cedar out on the landscape. That increases the diversity of these sites, so they can be more resilient to things like butterworm or disease. So trying to increase the diversity of sites is another thing. And those are the planters in the background, hand planting the trees. And with the tree climbing, yesterday I was down in Wisconsin, and we were picking, I was up on the top of these 100-foot tall red pines picking cones, and those get sent to our nursery where they extract the seed, and then they plant the trees, and then they package the trees up, send them back to the Superior National Forest, and then we plant them out on the landscape. And this is a picture that I took with my drone of moose in the fall. And you can kind of see the patchy mosaic there with conifer trees, and you can see some tamarack just starting to turn yellow in there. And these lowland areas are really important for them as well. So I've talked a little bit about tracking, but I just love it. This quote is from Paul Resendez. He's a wildlife photographer and author. Tracking an animal is like opening a door to the life of the animal. It's an educational process, like learning how to read. Following an animal's trail may bring you closer to it physically, but more importantly, it brings you closer to it in its perception. The longer you follow the animal, the deeper you enter into perceptual relationship with its life. I just thought that was really well said, and I really feel that whenever I track an animal. We have a Canada lynx monitoring program because they are a threatened species. And so by following their tracks in the wintertime, you can get a lot of really interesting information about their populations. That shows some perspective with my hand and the lynx tracks. So they got really big paws compared to like a bobcat, even though they're about the same size. Bobcats and lynx, overlap in how much they weigh, like that 20 to 40 pound range. But their paws are much bigger than a bobcat's because they're designed for traveling in deep snow. And that gives them that competitive advantage in these snowy environments. So top left, that's a snowshoe hare, which is their main prey. And then top right is an area where there's a lot of hare tracks in one spot. These are some of the signs that I look for when I'm tracking lynx. And then there's from a small sapling where the snowshoe hare has bitten off the inner bark, and that 45-degree angle cut is really indicative of a snowshoe hare clipping a bud off. So those are some of the things to look for. There's an aerial shot of a lynx trail, so there's a pretty good separation between each paw print. Sometimes, wolf track can look similar, but they have this toe drag that's pretty distinct, especially in deeper snow. And you'll see they have a rounded front, and they don't have claws registering in their tracks. But they show me some really cool things. There was one day that I was tracking the lynx, and it went right by this like severed tail of a flying squirrel, just like laying there bloody in the snow. I was like, what the heck? But the lynx, it didn't look like the lynx had went to the tail, so the tail must have been there after the lynx went by. And then I looked up, and there was this barred owl just looking at me like, you gonna eat that? You can have it. But that was cool. So some of the other things we look for is where they lay down. So a bed is what we call a short-term resting place, where they make this indent in the snow, and it can actually be pretty hard when you put your hand on it. We've spent some time there conserving energy, and sometimes when they hunt, they even will just they'll just wait and see if they see a hare, unfortunate hare stroll by, and then they'll just. I've seen it where it almost looks like the hare jumped right into its mouth. It's like it was just bedded down in the perfect spot. So often when they make a kill, there's not very much left. They use almost all of it, and they have these specialized teeth that allow them to shear the hair right off of the hair and the skin, and so all that's left is just this like husk of the snowshoe hare, and everything else besides the guts is pretty much consumed. Sometimes they even will bury their food for later, like a caching behavior. So that's what's happening on the right hand side. There's a hare underneath that snow. So this is a family group. You can see each arrow represents a different individual traveling together. All the tracks are facing the same direction. And then there's the hare run that they're following, that they're hunting right down the middle there. And then it did leave behind a scat right there. The mother did, which we can actually collect. That's a picture of me collecting scat. Sometimes we can collect hair from a bed, and we can actually send that into a lab for genetic analysis and get back information on individuals. So this is just some summary of the DNA database over time. It's been going for a long time now. Started in 2000. There have been over 3,000 samples collected, over 600 unique lynx individuals identified, nearly 500 individuals identified as kittens that have been recaptured over time, which is really interesting. This is a trail camera photo that I got at Wolf Ridge. There's 3 in that picture, so a mom and 2 kittens. They can have, we've had families as big as 5 detected as well. They'll stay with their mother for about the first year and then disperse the next coming breeding season, but sometimes the female kittens might stick around mom even a little bit longer than that. One of the things I'm interested in is there's a study that was using trail cameras to identify individual lynx based on their unique spotting patterns. And so this is in Glacier National Park, so there is some evidence to suggest that you can use trail cameras for that. And as an individual, as a photographer, one of the things I've been doing on my own is trying to create my own catalog of individuals using my camera traps, so they're really high quality, a little bit more high quality than the trail cameras, right? So I might be able to recognize the same individuals from year to year. So this one, and in tandem with that DNA collection, I can be pretty confident about the identity of each cat, especially if I collected, a scat from the site that was later analyzed. So this is, there's a unique number that's generated for each one. So this is 1705, and this is a male born in 2020. There's a different male about 10 miles away or so, new in 2022, Did not recapture it in 2023, and by recapture I mean collect a scat that then came back as that same individual. But it's interesting because we can see physically where they distribute over time and what areas are important to them. There's 1275, a female. She's had at least 2 litters since 2020. And then this is a recent image. I was really excited about this one. This is Link's mother carrying a snowshoe hare for her kittens that are not too far away. And this is likely 551, which she was born in 2013. And so she's going on 12 years old. And she's had 5 litters of kittens. Let me grab my water. That's a good mom. There's a pair of kittens that were a female and a male that were new in 2023. We had some students from the University of Minnesota, and we were their wildlife club comes out and helps us with some monitoring, and their car stopped, and because we were seeing some fresh tracks, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think they see something. And we backed up, and the family was huddled together right off the road. One of the things that we've detected is lynx bobcat hybrids. And so this is actually a spread from the National Federation Wildlife Magazine. And what we're seeing is that we have had some individuals that have come back from the DNA as hybrids. In all cases, the mothers were lynx and the fathers were all bobcat. And I don't know that we've seen too many physically out in the world, but they're expected to have a range of morphological traits that kind of blend the two animals. And so, that could have some implications for the future of lynx, because they do rely on that those adaptations that they have. So, if they're born with smaller feet, they might not be able to inhabit those areas with the deep snow as well, which gives them a competitive advantage over other animals that eat similar prey, like wolves and coyotes and bobcats and things. So this is a citizen science project that I've helped a little bit with. This is called the Awful Wildlife Watching Project, led by Ellen Candler. She's a PhD candidate out of the University of Minnesota, and she's recruiting hunters that shoot deer to monitor their gut piles to see what animals, what's the assemblage of scavengers throughout the state. And I think it's a really interesting project. So I helped her kind of advertise the project by using my DSLR camera traps to get some high quality pictures of a gut pile and what might feed on it to help her get the word out there. So these are a couple turkey vultures. You can see somebody's deer stand up in the background there, and then a trail camera set up on the tree. That's a raccoon just going at the guts, which is kind of gross, but they're frequent visitors of the gut piles that are left behind. And then fishers as well also come by. So the conservation photography aspect. So really, conservation photography, it empowers or uplifts conservation efforts. And so it's really about what you do with the images. And so for me, it takes a lot of different forms. I try to get other people interested in trail camera technology because, anyone can learn and anyone can be out monitoring or out there getting other people excited about wildlife and getting connected. And so some of the ways that I've done it is I've donated images to the North Shore Forest Collaborative. They do a lot of important restoration work, trying to bring some of these conifers back to private lands and public lands all along the North Shore. I've been on podcasts to talk about photography, and on the radio I've had a gallery at the Tetagooch State Park lobby where I have little interpret signs that told a little story about the conservation status of different animals. And then the Conservation Volunteer magazine, I think they do a really good job, and I I contribute to them. I did have that an image from the Gunflint Trail right near Swamp River Lake that made it to the cover, so that was pretty cool. One of my images got used for the Canada Lynx draft recovery plan. That was pretty cool as well. And then most recently I had a researcher from Panthera, which is a nonprofit organization, and they work worldwide to conserve the 40 species of wild cats and the vast ecosystems that they inhabit. And she reached out and she said she was doing this scientific monograph about Eurasian lynx, and she wanted to depict the differences between Eurasian lynx with a bobcat and a Canada lynx. And so she asked if she could use these images, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. You can put them in your book, so that's pretty fun. And so some sources of inspiration for folks who want to get into wildlife photography or conservation photography. These are some of the places that I like to go to get inspired. There's these competitions, and there's a lot of talented photographers. All of these competitions, they have pretty strict ethical guidelines, which I think is pretty cool. It's not just about getting the image, it's also, you got to consider the wildlife. The wildlife comes first. And really, anyone can be a conservation photographer. So if you're sharing your images, and try to get other people involved, iNaturalist is a great citizen science tool where everyone pretty much has a camera on their smartphone, and it's an app you can install, and it does get used by real-world scientists. The data you collect can be peer-reviewed, and it can be really helpful to have observations of plants and animals all over the place. And then Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy, I haven't actually taken it, but I think it's a really cool program, and it's to help train photographers to empower conservation. And then there's Snapshot Safari, which is another citizen science project where you can actually help identify animals in different trail camera images that get used around the world for different research projects. So that's a cool way to get involved as well. And that's all I have. So thank you.
Any questions for Ryan?
What's your power source for your camera straps? Do you carry a big battery?
Over time it has changed. At first I just used the camera that came, or the battery that came with the camera. It's just a little lithium ion battery, and it didn't last very long, and so over time I've kind of upgraded it, and now I use these external batteries. It's actually not that big, it's only about that tall, about that long, and it uses a dummy battery, which is basically just a placeholder that goes in the camera, but then because I have that big case, I've got an area in there where the external battery can sit, and I get about a month out of it, which is pretty good, even in cold temperatures. So, yeah. But I've seen people do like the battery grip, where you could buy where it can the camera can take 2 batteries instead of 1, and that can kind of double your lifespan. But still, I think really the way to go is that external battery that gives you more. But it's always been a challenge for sure. And if you get false triggers, which is where your sensor, accidentally thinks that there's an animal because the vegetation is swaying in the wind, or the sun is heating up the vegetation, that can really drain the battery life really quick too. So it's a lot of things to consider.
Thousands of pictures on my trail.
Yes, that's really hard to deal with. One of the things that you can do is you can actually build like a little hood for your sensor part of the camera that helps kind of restrict because it's like a cone of detection, and it's analyzing the whole scene, and if you can kind of narrow that down, that might help a little bit with the vegetation and the wind kind of thing. Also, I find that I have more problems when I have the cameras out in like really open areas, so like the edge of like a wetland where there's like really tall grass, and there's just like so much it's really hard to deal with that. But if you put it under a canopy, that can help a little bit, especially if you know, not too brushy or something. Yeah. Or like up here, there are these little rocky outcroppings where there's not much vegetation. That'd be a really good spot for a camera, like right on the edge of that, because the rock isn't gonna make it trigger, but
So facing
yeah.
the outcropping.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and a lot of animals will kind of enter those little openings, move along the edge of them, get a little break from the brush crashing. So, yeah.
There's been an individual link show up on the Chik-Wauk Trail camera frequently.
How exciting is that?
And I'm wondering if anyone knows anything more about it. Is there more than one? Do we know if there's more than one? Or-
We have, if you want to stick around, we can show you two of them fighting. And if we can turn the sound on, it is the most haunting, incredible sound you've ever heard. If you were out in the woods, you'd be running to your car. So we have one that shows up regularly. We've even named him Leon the Lynx, and others that might migrate into his territory. He's probably not happy about that. So. But has been around, I think, we think the same lynx for a couple of years, and shows up frequently on our trail cam.
That is really cool footage. I've seen that video that Mark's talking about, and yeah, Chik-Wauk, you know, having the cameras right on these trails, it's really powerful to see, you know, for visitors to see where they've walked is the same trails that are getting used by all these awesome animals.
Any other questions? If you do one more, and then we'll, I'm sure Ryan will stay for additional questions.
You talked about film cover
Yeah.
and how that affects moose populations and things like that. Can you explain that a little bit more? Is that pine trees holding the Earth's heat in more, or?
Yeah, it's more, you know, giving them a way to cool down. So, you know, in the summer especially, they can get really heat stressed really easily. And so, you know, they're less active in the middle of the day, so they're trying to find a place to bed down, to conserve energy and escape the heat. And so that's where those shady areas are really important. And like, you know, there have been some studies like Seth Moore was involved with that show that some of their collared individuals, they're seeking out these really shady or even some lowland areas to escape that heat. And then the cover piece, it's not just the temperature aspect, but it's also, you know, a predation thing too, having cover in these areas where they're feeding on brush. So it's not just all open. It allows them to hide a little bit easier as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all for coming. Additional questions, stop up and say hi to Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.